to Attenuation, a weekly podcast where two friends come together to drink beer, discuss beer styles and trends, and just generally ruminate on the meaning of life, aka beer. If you enjoy your time with us, we invite you to become a weekly listener and subscribe to the podcast. Without further ado, here is this week's episode.
Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Attenuation, a beer podcast. My name is Jason, and I'm joined by my best friend since 8th grade, Steven.
Hello. We nailed it that time.
We nailed it. I may or may not have a script. All right, so episode 6. We are going to tackle some popular beer style flavor profiles, where we cover kind of the flavors you're looking for when you're trying a certain style of beer, which will be a good way to start to understand what you're looking for and what you're tasting. I know early on when I was reading beer tasting notes, it just seemed like there was an impossible array of flavors and scents, and I just didn't understand how people were pulling that out of tasting beers. But what I discovered is styles kind of fall into different flavors and profiles that they're all sort of similar in a certain way, and they have their own variations. But if you know that template that you're looking for, it can make pulling those flavors out much easier because you kind of have a cheat sheet going in. And once I figured that out, it kind of helped.
Yeah, and I think for process. Me too, and you've said before, like, you're kind of impressionable when somebody says, like, you taste this and this, but it is helpful, because a lot of times you don't like, it's anytime you smell something like, that smells familiar, but I don't know what that is, or, you can't always put a name to something, and then when someone else does it, you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense, like, oh yeah, I just couldn't come up with that. So sometimes it is good to just get an idea of what a certain hop, flavors a certain hop gives off, because then you're you kind of start to look for that, and when you look for it, it's easier to find. So
exactly. So that's going to be our main topic. But as always, we're going to start with some tastings.
Yep.
So I'm going to introduce and pour mine and give some nose. And then I'm going to pass it to Steven. But today I have something kind of special. This is Halophile. So this is a 7.5% spontaneous sour from Speciation Artisan Ales in Comstock, Michigan. And
that's almost as hard to say as Attenuation.
Speciation, yeah. So, and I had to look up, I was like, what's a halophile? But apparently it's a creature that needs, an organism that needs high salt concentrations for growth. So,
like me.
So this was actually made specifically for Tavour, which is kind of interesting. And I love spontaneously soured beers, so I just grabbed it, and I'll let you know if it's worth it. I don't know.
Nice.
But
I was kind of surprised no one had done that before for Tavour.
Yeah, go ahead and did a special one just for them.
Special just for the yeah. But it's pretty cool.
And it does meet my rule of long list of flavors. So it says,
of course,
it's open fermented sour with pineapple, cherry, vanilla, and sea salt.
Oh, so it's brewed with those things.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And the salt, I'm assuming it's going to be forward based on the name of this beer.
Yeah, right. Okay, I'll introduce mine. Oh, you wanted to give some nose.
Yeah, let me give some quick nose.
Yeah, nose notes.
Okay, yeah. I'm definitely getting cherry. I'm also getting plum. No pineapple. I get the vanilla, and then it does smell tart. It does smell that it has that spontaneous funk. So
Love that.
I'm hoping this is going to be a good one. So let me take some taste of this while you introduce your beer.
All right, cool. All right, so I decided to go with a hazy IPA today, just because we'll talk a little bit later about some of the flavor profiles from hazy IPAs. So I just thought it would be appropriate to do one of those today. This is called Murky Waters from Riverlands Brewing in St. Charles, Illinois. It's a New England style IPA. It's brewed with Citra and Mosaic hops. It's like a powerhouse combination. You're going to see that a lot in a lot of breweries. Citra is just a very, very popular hop, but the combination of Citra and Mosaic is very common, so you'll see that a lot. Um, the other thing that's interesting about this beer is that it has, so they use a Pilsner malt, which is in a lot of ales, but Pilsner malt, which is a very light malt, very classic of the hazy IPA style, but it also has, it uses wheat and a barley called carafoam, which is mostly used it's like high protein, so it creates a really good foamy head, like a meringue would, like you would use the egg whites to create a meringue. So this should have a really, really strong head on it and a firm head that holds for a while because of that carafoam malt that they use.
That sounds good.
And it also lends a little bit of protein and thickness to the body as well with the beer, as do the oats.
Hold that up so I can see it. You listeners at home don't get this experience, but it looks very hazy, and it looks like it has a very fine. No, sorry, not fine. A very thick head.
Yeah, I love the straw-colored hazies. I just love that color. The lighter the malt, the better sometimes for me. For in a hazy, I love that color.
Yeah, it looks cool. What
and
are you
my
getting
nose,
on that nose?
Pineapple, a lot of pineapple, and like blueberry, and like a little bit of pine.
Very cool.
Yeah, like grassy pine.
All right, well, you start tasting that, and I will deliver my tasting notes on Halophile. So now I am depressed because I don't know if they're going to make this again, and I love it. So, it's a little bit like a Goza on the entrance because it's salt and sour, but it's overpoweringly sour. It is very sour, which I love. And then you kind of get the cherry enters as the sour diminishes, and then you get the vanilla too. And then just the finish is this really long, salty, sour finish. I'm not getting any pineapple. I'm not really detecting any of that, but definitely the cherry, vanilla, and sea salt. And in combination with just how sour this is a really fun beer to drink. But unfortunately, I don't know if I'll ever get to drink another one, so I'm going to savor this one.
Hey, that's kind of the fun thing about craft beer sometimes. Even when I go to my, one of my favorite local hot spots, one of my favorite spots, I mean, there'll be beers there. I just know that they may never brew again. And it's just like, oh man, that was one of my favorites. And you just have to enjoy it while you have it.
Yep. Stay in the moment, drink it slow. Absorb the experience.
It's kind of the same thing with, some of my white whale beers. Sometimes I just get one chance and I may never get a chance again. So just savor it while you have it.
That's right. It's good advice for many parts of life, not just beer drinking.
Well, this beer is awesome.
Okay, good. I'm excited.
Oh my gosh. It's, I don't know. I can't describe it other than it's really good, but really great sort of orange juice, citrus flavors. So orange and lemon with pineapple and just a really good like oat mouthfeel. So like a thicker mouthfeel, like definitely can tell it was brewed with oats. And just super smooth. Like nice. No bitterness at all.
What's the ABV on that one again?
7%.
Okay, yeah. Nice. That sounds awesome. Well, we both picked good ones today.
I want to go away from some mainstream stuff and find a brewer kind of maybe people haven't heard of. So
yeah.
But the beer had really good reviews. So I figured they had done a good job. I guess it's like a bunch of buddies. They were around a barbecue and they decided, hey, we should start a brewery. Is that how all breweries start?
I have to imagine
nowadays.
That's how all breweries start. Like, hey, we should make beer.
Hey, we really like beer. You think we could just make it?
Yeah, just make our life a lot less complicated. So I think both our beers get the rebuy thumbs up.
Yeah, definitely. This is one I would drink every time.
All right, that's good to know. Okay, so before we get to the main topic, I think you had some exciting news that you read.
Yeah, so we know how COVID has affected. It's affected a lot of breweries, a lot of small businesses, and it's depending on where you are in the country, different levels of things being opened up again. But there was news that as of April 22nd, New Belgium the tap room in Fort Collins, their big brewery and tap room, will open up again for in-house dining and beer serving. It's all been curbside to go until now. And they actually, I think, legally could have opened up earlier. They've just been very, very conservative in, they probably can afford to be, they have national distribution of their beer. I'm sure they could afford to take some time off from the tap room. But it's just cool that they were able to do that. They were able to be conservative and protect their employees. And then now they are finally opening up again, which is just a great sign for craft beer. And good for me because I'm headed to Denver next month too. So I'll actually get
jealous. To go. I'm jealous. That's one I've wanted to go to for a long time. You'll have to do some investigative work when you're there, because I really like their Lips of Faith. And I don't know, I haven't seen it for a while, so I don't know if they're still doing it or if it was on hiatus, but I'm actually going to mention one of them for one of the flavor profiles we're covering today.
Yeah. They do that Le Terroir still.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Good.
They make that one still.
Okay, if they're still making that one.
I don't know if they still call it the Lips of Faith series, but they make that beer still.
Okay, that's very good, because those are some of my favorites in that lineup. Yeah. So I'm glad to know that they're still making at least some of those.
I don't know if they are doing tours yet. They still might be closed down on the tours, which is disappointing, because I've heard that tour is amazing. But just being able to go there and drink beer is going to be really cool.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. All right, cool. So I guess we can kick off into our main topic. So to give you guys a little bit, if you want to follow along at home, we're cheating a little bit. I got a lot of this information off craftbeer.com, which I actually wasn't familiar with until today. But they actually have a section called Beer Styles, and it has a ton of really good information. So you can click any style. For example, I'm just going to click American Imperial Porter as the first one, and it'll run down the color of the beer in a range of what to expect, the IBU in a range of what to expect, the alcohol content in a range of what to expect. If you're really a beer snob, it tells you what glass to pour it into and what temperature to serve it at. And then it even has food pairings. It'll list a couple commercial examples, and then it will break down flavor and aroma and mouthfeel and ingredients. So this is a great place to start if you just want to start, or if you're already kind of a seasoned beer drinker. This is really interesting. You could just kind of poke around and look at these different breakdowns. So I use this as a basis. Part of this is a basis, and then part of it is my own personal experience. We each picked 4 styles that we're going to kind of break down. So speaking of which, I'll do porter and stout first. So as you may have, if you've listened to the show, you may know this is my favorite style. I was very good today. I have a number.
Didn't drink a stout today.
I didn't drink a stout, and there was like 3 in my beer fridge that I really wanted to pick. But I was good. I'm gonna diversify. So, but generally, what you're looking for in a porter stout, you're gonna get caramel, oats, and barley. Sometimes you might get notes of coffee, toffee, chocolate, darker fruits like cherries. It could be boozy. Some of them are really boozy. Like I had a boozy one a couple weeks ago, or sometimes the booze is not very present. And then potentially you can have vanilla. They like to add vanilla to those. And then if it's barrel aged, you can get wood from the barrel and possibly flavor types from the type of barrel that they use, like whiskey. So now obviously they're not all going to have these flavor profiles, and you're going to see commonalities between stouts. And then kind of what you're looking for when you're dialing in to figure out, one, do I like this style overall? If you don't like these flavor profiles, like you're probably not going to like the style unless you drink a lot of it. It might grow on you. But if you do like this flavor profile, kind of what you're exploring when you try different stouts is you want to find a stout that expresses the parts of the flavor that you like best. So for example, I don't super like coffee in my stouts, but I like chocolate and cherry and vanilla. And then if it's more recently, like cinnamon. I didn't actually list that. I think that's a little bit newer, kind of a newer style. But if I can find something that presents really strong chocolate, cherry, and vanilla and doesn't present boozy, because that's another thing I don't like, that's kind of what I'm looking for. So one, it kind of helps you kind of explore the style, and two, it can kind of cue you into like what you should be, not should be, or what you might be tasting when you taste a stout. And then for some examples of some stouts that you could try that you might be able to find, most of these are nationally distributed. Some of them are a little bit rarer, but I like New Holland's Dragon's Milk, Sierra Nevada Narwhal, which I think was one of my first stouts. And if you can find the barrel aged variant, that is incredible. Ballast Point Victory at Sea, Founders Kentucky Breakfast Stout, and then Firestone Walker Parabola. Those are some of my favorites, or just ones that kind of popped straight into the front of my brain when I was thinking about stouts. So, and maybe this is even useful for you, Stephen, because I know this is a style that you're learning to tackle.
Yeah, definitely. What's funny is I remember in our first episode in our sort of journey into craft beer, I mentioned a trip to Sierra Nevada that I took with you. Well, after the tour, we went to the restaurant and continued to drink lots of beer there. But one of the beers we got was like, I think they had some sort of special barrel aged narwhal, like a couple years old. But anyway, we got that for the table. Now at this point, like I said, I know nothing about beer. I don't like hoppy beers. I only liked Otreves on the tour. That's the only sour was the only beer I really liked on the tour. But I was really trying to impress this guy next to me who he seemed to be like the craft beer god for me. So when he said he liked narwhal, I was like, oh, sure, I'll try it. And it actually was really cool I don't know if I liked it or not when I drank it. But anyway, that was just a memory of narwhal that I had drinking it very early on in my craft beer journey, and maybe not realizing what I was actually drinking. But I think I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a solid one, and as far as I know, they make it every year. And the other thing that's kind of cool about most of these stouts is you can leave them in the fridge or cellar them, and they'll kind of change over time. I don't like to let them go too long, but I mean, if you pick up I think they usually come in a 4-pack. Narwhal does, and you can get it for like $10 probably at the grocery store. But you could drink 3 of them and then just save one until next year, and then maybe try it side by side with the next year's vintage, if you will.
Yeah, I think sometimes the the alcohol burn can kind of cool off a little bit as you age a beer. So.
Yeah, it could definitely help with that aspect. All right, so what is the first style you picked for us, Stephen?
So the first style I picked was Belgian Wit.
Oh, cool. I don't know much about this, so I'm excited.
Yeah, so this is a Belgian style ale. The wit is just German, or not German, Flemish for white, I think. And it uses the unique characteristics of this style is that it uses unmalted wheat. So with unmalted wheat, this means you're not going to get if it's unmalted, it means you're not going to get a lot of sugars, fermentable sugars from it. So what you're getting from the wheat is some protein. So it's going to be kind of hazy. It's going to contribute to the head, just like in the hazy I'm drinking today. And it's going to impart some of those like wheat flavors, think of wheat bread, but it's not going to increase like the alcohol content. It's not going to give off any fermentable sugars for the yeast. So anyways, it's brewed with unmalted wheat, and then usually it's spiced with coriander and orange. Your mainstream styles of this beer are going to be Blue Moon or Shock Top.
Oh.
Okay, so those are your like macro styles of this beer. Other than that, I think Allagash White is a really, really good clean version of this style. And also Adalbert's Wit beer is also a very, very good version of this. If you go to your local brewery and you see wit beer or white beer, it's going to be this sort of orange flavor, like sticking orange on the top to to decorate the beer like that. It's like you're gonna get orange and kind of that like Christmas, the the orange stuck with cloves, kind of that sort of orange spice. That's what you're going to get with this beer, with a nice sort of bready backbone and no hop bitterness whatsoever. The only hops they're going to use in this beer are like German noble hops, which are very, very mild hops. They basically impart a little bit of like floral, earthy aroma, and that's about it. They don't do too much to bitter the beer. So yeah, little to no hop bitterness. Going to be kind of a nice orangish color, and you're going to get a nice orange spice flavor. But it's a great intro to craft beer, honestly.
Okay, now that you mention it, it's funny because I didn't think I was familiar with this at all. But yeah, I definitely drank a lot of Shock Top, I think, like before I was more into craft beer. I definitely had like a Shock Top and Heineken and Newcastle phase. So
yeah, well, it's one of those things where like, when I didn't know that much about beer, and honestly, it's like at the time too, like if you went into a bar, they didn't have that many good beers on, like craft beers on tap anyway. So like these were the beers that I considered craft beer, right? Like if it was a Heineken or a Blue Moon, like I was not drinking the crappy macro styles. I was drinking better craft beer.
nice.
So it was still the macro companies kind of making craft beer, but I mean, Blue Moon is an awesome beer, honestly.
Still is. I would still drink one today.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing but love for almost all beers in between the two of us.
Yeah. So anyway, look for wit beers.
Yeah, I want to try, now that you mentioned the Allagash mix one, I'd actually really like to try like a fancy.
Yeah. Have you not had Allagash White?
I don't think so.
Oh, it's really good.
Yeah, I would really like to try that. So I'm going to keep my eyes open for that.
So what do you got next?
Okay, my next one is pretty classic. I don't know, a West Coast IPA. So, and I think you're going to cover our other coast IPA. But West Coast IPA, for me, when I hear IPA, I just think West Coast IPA. I don't know why. Maybe because that's what I was drinking originally when I was getting introduced to IPAs. But for West Coast IPA, you're going to have, and Steven's doing a great job. See, I'm not going to be able to like drop knowledge, so maybe you can back me up like on the hops and stuff like that they would use. But generally, like the flavor profiles, and again, I guess I didn't mention in the porter, but sometimes some of these flavor profiles or notes can be present in the nose, and some of them will be present when you taste. And what's really interesting about beer, and it's strange sometimes, like you'll smell so many flavors and you would expect them to be there when you taste the beer, and then they're not, and vice versa, or you taste something that you didn't smell at all. So a lot of times there's not overlap between the smell and the taste.
Yeah.
And sometimes there is like 100% overlap between the smell and the taste, but it's just another thing that it will kind of catch you off guard in the beginning when you're not tasting what you're smelling, or vice versa. But generally you're going to have like biscuity or sweet caramel malt, and then pine, like for sure, like pine, like vegetal pine, and like resin almost. It's hard to describe, but like when you taste it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then you'll get like citrus flavors, but generally like on the more bitter end. So like think of like grapefruit or like orange rind, those kind of things. And then you can get some floral and then usually bitter hops. So a lot of these styles, they like to present bitter, because I think that was, and we talked about this in a previous episode, but a while ago there was kind of like a bitterness race. And one of the beers I'm going to mention is like at the end of this arms war or arms race. But yeah, so like they kind of, some of these styles like the fact that they're bitter, where that might not be as popular mainstream nowadays. But so for example, my one go-to is Lagunitas IPA. That's just a great, you can get that almost anywhere. It's like my number one choice at a restaurant. Sometimes if they just have like a normal lineup. Ballast Point Sculpin is a really good IPA to do. But then my two that I really wanted to mention was Sierra Nevada Torpedo. So now I kind of want to ask Steven, but because I don't know this for sure, but the reason they call it Torpedo, I do know, is because they have this giant metal cylindrical, they call it a torpedo. but they put the beer in there and then they add hops after fermentation. So, but I think they also move it through. They're like cycling the beer through the hops. So I don't know. Did Sierra Nevada make that popular?
I don't know. There's all sorts of like gimmicks and tricks that
Yeah.
breweries do to add hops to the beer. Whether they whirlpool them through, they whirlpool the beer through with the hops. They just dump them in.
Okay.
Um, yeah, you can put them in a bag and like sort of like kind of like tea bag, kind of soak the hops into the beer. Kind of depends on like how much hop particles you want in the beer, and then how much you want, and it's all about too like when you add the hops. Like, do you add the hops
Okay.
early in fermentation or during the boil, or late in fermentation? And it's all about like, what are you trying to impart? Are you trying to impart more aromas, more flavors, more bitterness? And that will just all like dictate whether you know hop the beers early. There's also a lot of like cryo hops and hop concentrates and stuff. So, and like hop pellets. So there's all these different kinds of like hop products now, that are all geared towards with some intention in mind, whether that be imparting only flavors but without the bitterness, or fruit flavors without the like vegetal flavors. Just depends on like what of the it's these certain acids in the hops that are imparting these things, and it's like nowadays like it's so advanced in terms of what part of the hop you're using or what kind of hop you're using, that dictates what your product is in the end, in terms of whether you get a bitter or fruity hop or fruity beer, So,
Gotcha. So, well, that was a really good answer. Thank you.
so
But
that was
anyways,
their way.
yeah,
That was their cool way
yeah,
of hopping their beer.
exactly. These torpedo, and I thought it was really cool. And you can see them if you go to the brewery. But they basically sell torpedo, which I really like. It's like still one of my favorites. It's one of the earliest IPAs I was into. But then the ultimate expression, and I gotta think this is one of the hoppier beers you can get. I'm sure there's other ones, but they eventually made, and I don't know when they first made this, but Hoptimum is their triple IPA, and I believe it's over 100 IBU. So, yeah, that's an example of a beer that they want it to be super high IBU. That's kind of the selling point. So, in that's not going to be as present in when we get to the New England IPAs per se, but yeah, West Coast IPAs, some of them just want to be super hoppy, super bitter, and so that's kind of like what you'll see in those expressions.
Yeah, and it really is basically the child of the English bitter. So these beers were being made in England that were malty. Like, definition of their style really was to create a perfect balance between maltiness, like the malt sweetness, and the hop bitterness, and those work together. But they're bitter beers. The kind of difference is that the English bitters are very low alcohol. They're more like 4 or 5%. So it was like high bitterness, low alcohol. Americans, we like our alcohol, so they did it a little different where their IPAs tend to be a little bit higher alcohol than that, but they certainly played off that maltiness and bitterness balance.
Okay, awesome. No, that's good background information. So, okay, so that was my second style. So, what did you pick for your second style?
Well, I'll just jump off that and do the New England IPA. I think that's a good segue, because I think one of the big differences for me is, we talk a lot about bitterness, and the New England IPA tends to be a lot less bitter. That's kind of the point. It's more, they use more techniques in the hopping of the beer. They do it later in the fermentation, so what's called dry hopping. So you've boiled the beer, and I'm sure that most New England IPAs will have some hop additions during the boil, but not always. I've I've done a home brew of a hazy IPA where I did no hop additions during the boil. It's just a real fast 20-minute boil to kill everything in the beer, and then all the hop additions were during fermentation, which is called dry hopping. And the point of dry hopping is to impart more flavors and aromas and less bitterness. And then you also, depending on how you add the hops in, when you like how I was talking about how you just pour them in, a lot of times you get a lot of like just particles in the beer. So that's kind of what makes it hazy, is they don't filter out a lot of those those hop particles as well as the yeast particles. There's just a lot of stuff floating around in the beer. But anyway, all of that is really to give flavor with minimal bitterness. So what's really cool about this style, and was good for me when I was getting into starting to learn about hoppier styles, was that I could really pull the flavors out without getting bogged down in the bitterness of like, I'm trying to like, it's kind of like learning to drink coffee by drinking, like foo-foo coffee with milk and stuff and sugar in it and stuff. And then you could progress to like blacker and blacker coffee. It's the same thing. It's just, you can't enjoy it or drink enough of it to find how you like it, because you can't get through that bitterness. So I mean, obviously they're blowing up in popularity because of this, because they're easier to drink, but people appreciate the flavors that the hops impart. So the other cool thing is that for me, I've come to like more maltier styles, but I didn't always really like that malt, that caramel flavor. And so I really like the pale malts, the Pilsner malts, and the crystal malts, which are the two palest malts. And those are the malts that tend to be used in a New England IPA. And the other thing too is the yeast that they use tend to be yeasts that produce esters or fruitier flavors. We talked about a little bit about that last week, where the esters kind of give you that pear, that banana flavor. So if you have a yeast that's producing fruity flavors, and then you're using these hops, these late hop additions that create really nice fruit flavors, you're just going to get an awesome beer that's not balanced with malt, because you're showcasing the hop flavors. You get to showcase that without having to try to balance it with the malt sweetness. So I made a list. This is the most fun I had preparing for this episode. I'm preparing a list of flavors that you could possibly get from hops. Okay, while you're drinking one of these New England IPAs. Lemon, lime, mint, melon, grapefruit, mango, guava, pineapple, bubblegum, blueberry, pine, grass, coconut, lychee, orange, rose, passion fruit, dank, marijuana flavor, apricot, stone fruit flavors. And then there's a great hop called Nelson Sauvin. It gives a really good, like, crisp white grape kind of Riesling flavor. So those are all potential flavors you could get from hops. Like a combination of those, some beers use 5 or 6 different kinds of hops, so you could be getting potentially a ton of those flavors all in one beer. And that's, it can be difficult to parse through some of those, but man, it's really fun. And the other thing too I learned early on in my craft beer journey is that, like, I would read some of these profiles of IPAs, and they would say things like pineapple, passion fruit, or grapefruit, orange, and I would drink them expecting to be drinking juice. And what I've had to learn is that you have to learn how to taste pineapple without the sweetness. So, like, unsweetened pineapple juice. What does that taste like? You know, unsweetened orange juice. What does that even taste like? And that's where like developing your palate really comes into play. And that's where like sometimes you do have to kind of read somebody's tasting notes, somebody that's, more experienced than you, and you read it and you think, yeah, that is pineapple. I've never thought of it in the context of not sweet pineapple.
That's a really good way of describing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good breakdown. That's awesome.
Anyway, so like I said, a lot of these flavors will be in the beer, but you have to think of them as not sweet versions of that flavor. And that might help you.
That's going to help me, I think. Jeez. Okay, so I will move on to my next style. Oh, did you have a list of New England IPAs that you would recommend?
Go to your local brewery. There's like 5 on tap, I promise
you.
you.
There you go. All right. So they're readily available.
Voodoo Ranger from New Belgium. We'll go on the New Belgium kick. They have a juicy haze now.
Nice.
Hazy version of their IPA, which is really good. Sierra Nevada has a hazy little thing. That's a great beer.
Actually, I haven't had that one yet.
Really?
Yeah.
Dude.
Yeah.
That's a good beer. That's a great.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll check it out.
That was like one of the first like really commercially available canned hazy IPAs.
Gotcha.
So definitely worth checking out.
Nice. All right, so I will go on to my next style. I picked brown ales. So I really like brown ales. They're kind of hard to find. I like brown ales and I like red ales. And they're you don't find too many of them, actually. So the funny thing is, I did mention it before, but one of the reasons I like brown ales is because I really liked, and I still do, like Newcastle. It's a Newcastle brown ale. But in a brown ale, generally you're going to smell and or taste. It's going to be like a rich biscuity malt. There's going to be there could be dark fruits. So think like raisins, plums. And then there could even sometimes be notes of coffee. But also you're going to get maybe toffee or caramel, or you could even get like some apple in some of those. But yeah, I just like this style. It's like a good winter beer when you don't want to go full porter, but you want something that's like substantial and has some pretty strong flavor. But yeah, think of like Newcastle, Lost Coast Downtown Brown is really good. And then I don't think I've had this one, but I was kind of like looking for a list of browns, but I love Anchor Brewing, and they actually make a brown called Breckles Brown. So I really want to hunt that down and try one of those. But yeah, brown ale and red ale are two styles that I do really like, and it's a little bit difficult to find them expressed in the craft beer world, but there's a few examples and they're quite good.
Newcastle Brown is awesome.
Yeah.
That's a great beer.
It is a great beer. That was like, to me, that was like the height of beer for a long time. If I had a 6-pack of Newcastle, I was a very happy camper.
Yeah, and that's like you said, kind of a great transition between like drinking a amber or Oktoberfest kind of thing, and then moving towards the darker style. Like if you want to take baby steps towards porters and stouts, that's your brown ale's gonna right there, red and brown.
Red and brown.
Just move up the color.
Yeah, you're just slowly getting darker. All right, so what is your next style, Stephen?
So my next one is kind of cool. It's a cream ale. So I actually really didn't know what this was. I've had a few. I don't recall any specifics about what they tasted like. So I was kind of interested to learn about this style. What's really cool is it's very similar to the Kolsch that we talked about last week. It is a hybrid style. It's actually basically the American version of the Kolsch. So it's that ale yeast, but cold lagered to remain super, super crisp. And it's actually even more crisp than the Kolsch. You should have 0 esters. No esters, no phenol, so no spice, just a very, very crisp, clean beer. And really the big difference between this and the Kolsch is also that they're using an American hop. So a Kolsch beer should be using a traditional Kolsch should be using a German noble hop. Whereas and when I reference German noble hops, just think of it as kind of like the heirloom tomatoes of the hops. These are like the original OG hops, and they're very mild, and they're kind of almost I don't know, it's kind of laughable to talk about them in high regard now because there's just so many like flavorful hops now because these hops are so mild. But they're going to be used in all your very mild styles. So anyway, but there's a hop called Liberty hop. It's a descendant of I think the Hallertau hop, which is a German noble hop, and that's used in the cream ale. So just like the Kolsch, it's a hybrid style where you're using ale yeast. You can, I think even in judged competitions, you can use a lager yeast to make a cream ale, technically. But yeah, they're cold lagered and very, very crisp and clean. So you're just going to get a little bit of like honey wheat flavor, a little bit of like just a slight maltiness, but just very, very pale, clear. I would say even more than the Kolsch, this is like just a step up from your lagers, your macro lagers.
I have a favorite. I don't know if it technically classifies, but I have a favorite cream ale.
Yeah?
It's Mother Earth Brewing Company, Cali Creamin'.
Ah, yeah. Okay.
That one is so good. I think they add vanilla to it, but
okay.
yeah, it's awesome.
That's cool. Yeah, I think I drank that at the beer festival. Again, I don't actually remember, like what it tasted like or anything, but so that's why it's kind of cool to now know exactly what that style means.
Yeah, it's basically kind of what you described, except it has a little bit of vanilla in it. So it makes it like extra refreshing and tasty, in my opinion. Did you have a few other cream ales that you could find maybe in the store? Or?
No, unfortunately, this is like one of those styles that just is not, I don't know, it's not mainstream. And I don't know why, but it's just very, very limited to like craft brewers, local craft brewers. I don't think there's not a whole lot of macro brewed cream ales.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was a fun pick. All right, I'll go to my last style. So I should have done more homework. You're doing such a good job of giving the background. I think I just stuck with tasting notes and notes, but so don't send me too much hate mail if I mess up some of this. But the next style I picked is Belgian style Flanders.
Ooh, this is such a cool style.
Yeah, so I started to get a little bit wiki lost on like red versus brown versus old and but I didn't want to go. Maybe that could be a topic that could fill a whole episode. So I'm staying surface level. But this is one of my favorite styles. I had I think my first exposure to this style was I think you can get this anywhere. I'm probably gonna mess up the pronunciation, but it's Duchess de Bourgogne, or yeah. And I think that's available everywhere, but that's technically like the first time I had this style. And
you butchered that, by the way.
Did I? How do you say it?
I don't know, but I know you butchered it.
I know. I'm so bad at pronouncing things. That's why I try not to. I'm really sorry. But yeah, so but you're gonna get like roasted malts, fruit esters, and then you're gonna get, this is why I like it so much, sometimes you get cherry, which is like my favorite flavor in a beer. Cherry, raisin, plums, figs, maybe prunes, and then it's gonna kind of taste like vinegar sometimes. It can be tart and sour and potentially even funky, like a little bit of that barnyard funk. But I just remember I really like sours, and then this is just kind of a variant of sours that I really enjoy, and there's some really good ones. So this is where New Belgians La Folie comes in. I don't know how to say that one either, but that's their version of this style. Really good. They barrel age it. You can also get Cuvée des Jacobin.
This is the best.
Oh man, And then
This is my favorite part of the whole episode.
historical one is, and we'll come back to this because I'm embarrassed by my lack of knowledge and a lack of ability to pronounce these styles. But Rodenbach makes this style as well, and that's a good one. You can get that. You can usually find that at like Total Wine if you go to the import section. But I like all of these. I would like to discover more because I don't think I've met one that I don't like yet. So a very fun and interesting and historic style. Like this is a very old style.
Yeah, this is one of those like OG beers where like
Yeah.
it was like it's like you made this by accident, you know, like you made something else and then it like wild fermented and you were like, oh, this is kind of cool, you know, like it's completely accidental.
Yeah, and maybe that it also speaks to my love of like spontaneous ale as well. So, or
Yeah,
spontaneously fermented.
yeah, that like balsamic vinegar flavor is such a weird idea, but it really does work, surprisingly.
Totally. So yeah, that was my fourth and final style that I picked to highlight. Do you have one more?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite styles of sour. It's called a Berliner Weiss. And this is another one. I did a really bad job of picking these because not a lot of these are like sort of commercially available. You're gonna have to look at your local brewery. That's my point. Go to your local brewery. Support your local breweries. Stop buying them in the grocery store.
Support local beer, independent.
This is also a really popular style right now because it's being used as sort of a base for some of the heavily fruited sours that we talked about, the smoothie sours. A lot of those use a Berliner Weiss base. But anyway, the base beer, Berliner, just means someone from Berlin or coming from Berlin. So this style is a wheat beer, Weiss beer, wheat beer from Berlin. This is their favorite style. And originally it was wild fermented, most likely had some sort of Brettanomyces yeast, which is a wild sour yeast that kind of lends itself to that barnyard funk. They tend now to be soured with a process called kettle souring, which is just using bacteria to produce lactic acid prior to the boil. You boil off the bacteria and then you pitch it with yeast and you keep that lactic sourness. So I would say the majority of Berliner Weisses now are kettle soured, but it's a wheat beer. To be a wheat beer, generally you have to be more than 50% of your malt, of your grain bill, is wheat. It's very, very little bitterness, almost no hop flavor or aroma at all. Again, you're going to use one of the German noble hops, like a German Hallertau hop, just for, I don't know, a little bit of like floral aroma. And then that's what you're going to get out of this beer is like cracked wheat, floral aromas, a little bit of like lemon, and then it's going to be tart from the kettle souring. Such a great, I see why it's being used as a base beer because it kind of just is a base beer. When it comes to sours, it's kind of like the most basic sour. In fact, I think even in Berlin, if you were to go to like a old school pub and get a Berliner Weiss, it's usually offered with some sort of you add in syrup. So you add like a raspberry syrup to it. So that's how it was consumed back then too.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So again, like I said, it lends itself to being fruited for sure, and sweetened. But man, I've had some classic Berliner Weisses. They were awesome. I love that sort of lemony tart. There's just no overwhelming flavor. It's just a nice, refreshing beer, but like with the sourness too, which I love. A really great style of this is St. Arnold has a Berliner Weiss. I should have looked it up to see what it's called. But like I said, this is again not a very like commercially available style. But if you have a good grocery store that carries some good craft beer, or if you have like a Total Wine and More, or any store that has like a nice craft beer section, you should be able to find a Berliner Weiss these days.
Is it Sour Power?
No.
Oh, okay. St. Arnold has a Berliner Weiss called, it's called Boiler Room. I'm sorry.
Yes, Boiler Room. Yep.
Sour Power was just the head of the article.
Yep, Boiler Room.
Yeah.
One of the first, I think, actually probably the first Berliner Weiss I ever drank was Boiler Room. And I just remember thinking, and again, this was very early on in my craft beer journey, and I just remember thinking, yes, like, this is the beer I love. Like, this, this is the beer that was made for me. So
Nice. That's awesome. And that is kind of what it's all about, is finding the beer that's made for you. And there's no wrong answers. Doesn't matter what's popular, what people like. If you find the beer you like, then you found the beer you like. Congratulations. And then try to like more.
Yeah. Also, a good thing to remember is that there is bad beer out there.
No.
No, truthfully. Like, if you drink something at a brewery and you think, I really don't like that, just don't give up on that style from one taste, because it might have just been a really bad beer. This is especially true if you're at a restaurant. You're not at a brewery. You're drinking something on tap at a restaurant, because you don't know like how long that keg they've had that keg. You don't know how long. You don't know how well they clean their beer lines. What beer was in that line before they tapped that keg. So your best bet is to go to actual brewery, because they're going to be making sure that the beer that they brew is being, consumed at its best flavor. But also another thing that can happen is the brewery can, they make something, they spend, weeks making a beer, and maybe it's not that good, but are they going to throw it out? They might serve it thinking, somebody's going to like this. So that may be why you're getting a bad beer. But anyway, just know that not every beer brewed is a perfect example of that style or a good example of that style. But hopefully we've given you some guidance as to what you might taste when you get into one of these styles, and some of the flavors you might find. So might help.
Yeah, for sure. And don't be afraid to read tasting notes, and just know you're not always going to taste. I'm very impressionable, so as Steven said, I sometimes will read tasting notes and then think I taste those. But then also sometimes I read tasting notes, especially if they're like paragraphs long, and I'm just like, whatever, man. I don't know what you're experiencing, but I'm not experiencing that. So don't be afraid if you don't experience all the flavors you see written down either.
Yeah, and don't worry that your taste doesn't match somebody else's. That's the cool thing about hops too. That like, one or two hops might, especially brewed together, might impart like 7 or 8 flavors, and maybe the 4 you taste may not be the 4 that someone else tastes, and it's not even wrong. It's just the ones you taste, or the ones that you can recognize. So
yeah, it's all part of the fun of drinking craft beer.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Flavor.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that will do it for episode 6. My name is Jason, and I'm joined here by my best friend from 8th grade. That's Steven.
That's me.
And we are signing off. We will see you next week for episode 7.
All right. Thanks for listening.
And cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Attenuation, a beer podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next week. Cheers.